Hello everyone. This story is about, what if God-like Naruto was able to feel other people's emotions and fall in love with Mei and Anko? Please like, share and subscribe for more. Also check the other fics I've uploaded. Now let's start. It was frightening. Mitarashi Anko and Terumi Mei were considered powerful kunoichi, some of the top female ninja out there, but watching the spar before them, they couldn't help but fully realize how weak they truly were. Uzumaki Naruto was the Kamikage of Konoha. He had fought Jinchuriki, Kage, and even a Jinchuriki that was a Kage. He was considered to be the most powerful shinobi in all the nations. He was faster, stronger, and all-around superior than any ninja that walked the earth. He had faced Suna, Oto, the Shinigami, and Iwa all at once, and came out the victor. Uzumaki Naruto was a god among men, the greatest there was. So why was he the one panting, and his opponent the one with a smirk? Deciding to spar after his son introduced his love interests, Minato was surprised to hear that Naruto had managed to learn the Hiraishin. The fact that he was able to learn such an advanced technique in a month had almost been too much to take in. It had taken him the majority of his shinobi career to perfect the Night Aims technique. His son must have been a genius on a level not known to man for him to accomplish such a feat. But after sparring with his child, he quickly found something unexpected. He was better than Naruto at the Hiraishin. The prolonged use of the Flying Thunder God was close to impossible. Human beings were not meant to move that fast, and the continued jumps wore the user down fast. Minato, having used the technique for years, was intimate with the jutsu, able to shrug the fatigue and exhaustion off just as fast as it came. He didn't know if it made him a bad father, but the fact that he was still better at something than his genius son made him happy. Of course, if they truly fought, not as father and son, but as enemies, the outcome was impossible to predict. He'd rather not think about it, though. He would die before he struck his son with malicious intent. So here he was, standing tall, his breath calm and his smirk present, while his son panted, his brow covered in sweat. His dad was too advanced in the technique they decided to exclusively use for this spar. It kind of made him laugh a little. Here he thought fighting the Shodai for real would be a nightmare. The real nightmare was his dad, the Yellow Flash. It was like trying to fight light or sound. He was too fast, too nimble. You couldn't fight what was faster than sound, no matter how powerful you were. How anyone survived his father was something he didn't understand. No. He did understand. Those who survived a battle against the Yondaime Hokage. They were the ones he chose to spare. Well, would you look at that? A deep voice called out, walking up to the two blonde shinobi. The Gakis finally met his match. Jiraiya chuckled. Sensei, Minato greeted with a smile on his face. Oh, shut up, Erosenin. Naruto muttered, crossing his arms. I can still kick your ass, he said childishly. Now, kid, Jiraiya wiggled his finger back and forth. None of that talk. There are beautiful women around, after all. He smirked. Turning his head to his women, the women he loved more than life itself, he smiled. They sat together, side by side, watching him. It warmed his heart. Next to them, Sakura sat, Sasuke pressed against her front, her arms wrapped around him. Her head hung over his shoulder, her eyes closed. Sasuke, with his eyes covered in white bandages, was obviously at peace with his demons. He would soon see through his mother's eyes. Naruto made sure to that the moment they next met, which was yesterday morning, before the sun even came out. Within Sakura's warm embrace, he felt so comfortable he could stay there forever. They took each other's first times, they were bonded forever now. All these things Naruto felt within seconds, his empathy picking everything up. He then turned to Jiraiya, already knowing what was going to be said. So you found her, then? He whispered. Good. He smiled. When do you go? Jiraiya wasn't even a little surprised, already used to his godson's abilities. In an hour, he replied. And you're coming with me? Naruto raised an eyebrow. I am, he asked. Hi. Jiraiya replied. I could use your help trying to find her. Your empathy will quicken the search. I thought you already found her. Naruto said. One doesn't just find a Sannin, kid. The sage said. I located her general location, that's the best anyone can do, even me. We'll find her pretty quickly, don't worry. He smirked. I wouldn't dream of keeping you away from your lovers. He said the last word with a certain emphasis, knowing how embarrassed his first student would be. And just as predicted, Minato blushed harder than Jiraiya at the female bathhouses. Alright, I'll go. Naruto shook his head at his sensei's antics, changing the subject before his father was permanently the color of a tomato. But we're taking Sasuke with us. He looked to his student, giving a slight nod. And to the small surprise of the others, Sasuke nodded back. Leaving a confused, but mostly curious, Minato and Jiraiya, he took his women by the hands and vanished in a gilded flash. Standing, Sasuke allowed Sakura to lead him to his apartment. He needed to pack his supplies, and more importantly, they needed to have alone time together, much like what Naruto had felt from his lovers. They were going to be apart for who knew how long, they needed to lose themselves in each other's flesh again before it was too late. Minato, having the ever-calculating mind he had, was able to determine as much, and his blush intensified. Children leaving to do such. He couldn't even think about it. And his sensei's perverted chuckling and questionable rubbing of his hands wasn't helping. Even after an incredibly tough spar with the Yondaime Hokage, Uzumaki Naruto was able and willing to make love to his lovers for as long as he could. Anko had given him the sultriest look he'd ever seen from the snake summoner, and with her breath touching his ear, and the resulting words that left her mouth, had Naruto standing at attention. In a sense, he had never thought of using the Kage Bunshin like that before. Suffice to say, the following activities they took part in were particularly dirty, but they never felt so good before in their lives. Now sweaty and exhausted, Anko and Mei clung to their young lover, his strong heart beating to a steady rhythm filling their ears. They were all somewhat embarrassed by what they had just done, but they also knew that everyone enjoyed themselves. The silence was finally broken by Anko. Naruto, she began. During the invasion, when Sasuke thought Sakura was killed, she didn't know how she should say it. Naruto could feel the words on her mind, but decided to let her speak them. He wanted both of them to speak their minds around him. He loved them, he'd understand mostly anything. I've never felt such dark chakra in my life. She finally let it out. She had been terrified of the Uchiha that day. His chakra felt darker than even Orochimaru, something she never thought she'd see. His very soul seemed to scream from the darkness, and it scared her. Naruto smirked. Sometimes, he began, the brightest of lights come from the darkest of places, Anko. He replied. He knew of Sasuke's overwhelmingly dark chakra, but that's exactly what made him so special. A demon was only a demon when they defied God. If they took up the flag of heaven, then they were angels, no matter what they felt like. Sasuke may feel like a demon, but he is our demon, and he will devour our enemies, as will I. There wasn't a single thing Naruto wouldn't do for his home. Anko just nodded, believing what her knight was telling her. If Sasuke had such powerful compliments and trust from someone like Uzumaki Naruto, she knew they were someone she could feel safe around. She knew him to be a chunin, a new promotion, but a promotion nonetheless, but she just couldn't help but wonder just how powerful the young Uchiha truly was. She hadn't seen what the boy could do, not really. The fight against Gaara was spectacular, but it also ended prematurely, on both occasions. And those eyes that looped around crimson and black. Those eyes that were filled with brutal darkness would never leave her nightmares. She just knew, somehow, that Uchiha Sasuke was someone not to be trifled with any longer. She could just tell in the way he spoke, the way he walked. On the other side, Mei sighed. Naruto tightened his arm around the warm body of his Kiri lover, nodding his head. I know, he then tightened the arm around Anko. I don't want this to end, either. He groaned, sitting upright. But I have to be at the gate in 10 minutes. He skillfully slid out of bed, collecting his scattered clothes. I already know the answer, but do you have to leave? He asked Mei with a pout. Mei nodded, somewhat sadly. Yes, she began, I need to get back to Kiri. News of the invasion has already reached my borders. If I don't hurry back, my shinobi will become restless. She then gave a small smile. And don't you want my people to know that their almighty hero beat back a god? She asked. I'd rather have you all to myself. He answered honestly. Naruto knew about the hero worship Kiri felt towards him, but none of that stuff really appealed to him. Sure, it was nice to know that people appreciated him, but only in reason. When they started building statues of you and praying to you like you're some kind of messiah or god was where he drew the line. Thankfully, that hadn't started yet, or, at least not to his knowledge, but he was worried now. To the world, Uzumaki Naruto, the Kamikage of Konoha, battled the death god and beat him back, after fighting off an Otosuna incursion, and before utterly annihilating the greatest army of IWA. Which included its Tsuchikage. If he wasn't straight out worshipped now, he'd be surprised, but grateful. Oh, so grateful. Excuse me? Anko asked with a somewhat mischievous smirk on her face. I think she belongs to me just as much as she belongs to you now, don't you think? She licked her lips seductively, wiggling her eyebrows suggestively. For everyone, images of what had just transpired rushed through their minds, their faces reddening at the memory of their very naughty experiments. Mei just coughed into her hand, trying to force her blush down. Be that as it may, she began, not even denying the dango-loving woman's words, which was not missed by either ninja. My village needs its Mizukage. She slipped her sandals on underneath her shin guards, and stood from the bed, now fully dressed. I'll miss you though, she then reddened again, both of you. Anko threw her trench coat over her shoulder, she too now fully dressed for Anko, and gave her a small, genuine smile, one that only Naruto, and now Mei, had the pleasure of seeing. I'll miss you more, baby. To most, that would just be a suggestive gab at the beautiful woman, but to her lovers. It was her bringing up a certain activity Mei seemed to enjoy a lot involving Anko's impressive breasts. Naruto just smiled and laughed, somewhat grateful for Anko's playfulness. I'll miss the both you, too. He spoke up, rescuing a thoroughly embarrassed Mei. And I can't wait to see you two again. He looked to the window, sighing. But I have to go now. He grabbed a bag and slung it around his back, courtesy of a Kagebunshin. He closed the distance between them, and with a passion only few people ever felt, he kissed Anko, savoring her lips, her tongue, her warmth. He then broke away, turning and doing the same with Mei, drowning in her sweet smell and taste. After catching their breaths, Anko and Mei just nodded, smiling at the powerful shinobi, wanting their happy, not to mention satisfied, faces to be his last memory of them. They knew they'd see each other again, but they were shinobi, no matter how powerful they were, death would not show mercy. I love you. Anko said, softly. I love you. Mei said, gently. Naruto sighed in happiness. I love you more. He replied, Hyra shining out of the building, leaving Anko and Mei alone. The snake mistress looked at Mei through the corner of her eyes, seeing that she was doing the same. With a smirk and a small chuckle, Anko turned to her, smashing her lips into hers with a caring force. The deep kiss lasted for at least a minute, in which they fought for dominance with their tongues, exploring their mouths in a dazed state. When it ended, they both panted somewhat, before smiling at each other. Goodbye, Mei. Anko whispered. I love you. Bye, Anko. Mei whispered. I love you, too. Both Anko and Mei knew that their love for each other was dwarfed by their love for Naruto. And that the only reason why they had these feelings for each other was due to their minds becoming one and their close proximity to one another when they were intimate with the blonde. But they didn't mind. It felt good, and they decided to just roll with it. There was no reason they couldn't act on their feelings. They didn't see the harm in it. And then, with one final smile, the two women left. Minato stood at attention, his body and skill now mirroring what it used to be. He couldn't help the small smirk on his face, which was covered by his white mask. He wore gray armor over black cloth, a mandatory tanto on his back, and his weapons pouch on his hip and right leg. His sun-kissed hair swayed with the breeze, and his breath was calm. Team Row, Nico began, welcome our newest member, she gestured to Minato, Nezumi too. She finished, causing actions that, if not for his natural reflexes, Minato would have been smashed into the earth. Ushi, a hulk of a man, rushed towards him with speeds that shouldn't have been possible for someone of his size. The ox-masked operative raised his massively muscled arm, ready to smash the imposter. The real Nezumi was tiny on the outside, and even though the hair matched, this person was not Taicho. Minato barely had enough time to dodge the man's assault, swiveling to his right, placing an open palm on his body out of habit. Before he could react, the hulking man was upon him again, his speed almost too much for the yellow flash to handle. A giant fist was mere seconds from crushing his skull, when Nezumi too simply vanished in a gilded light. Before Ushi knew it, a tri-pronged kunai was pointing at his kidney. Ushi grunted, before doing something unexpected. He rotated, allowing the knife to slice his flesh clean, before bringing both of his hands up, poised to smash this pretender. Ushi, enough. Nico finally spoke, her words carrying the authority of the real Nezumi, so he listened, but kept his fists ready to take him out. What is this, Nico Taicho? Saru asked the question on everyone's mind. How could anyone take up the title of Nezumi after the Kamikage had made it so famous? There wasn't a person in the entire village, save for maybe Hitaki Kakashi, who could wear the mask with confidence, and that's only because Kakashi had a similar reputation within the corps. Not because he was equal in power. Rohan, Nico began, her voice stern, what we are about to discuss is an SS-class secret, one given only to you by Naruto Taicho's command. This secret will never leave your lips, and you will only hear it once. The team tensed. Something so secretive was usually Hokage ears only. The fact that their Taicho thought them worthy to know meant a lot to them. The greatest ANBU squad ever to grace Konoha no Sato stood straight, their demeanor that of professional assassins. Nezumi too, take off your mask. Whatever Team Ro was expecting wouldn't prepare them for what was to come. They had fought alongside the Bringer of Hope, the most powerful shinobi in all the elemental nations. They had seen Uzumaki Naruto do the impossible on multiple occasions. Whether it be destroying entire nations single-handedly, or battling gods, they stood next to him with no fear, confident in his strength and ridiculous success record. But when they finally saw what was underneath the mask of the blonde, they would find nothing but confusion and shock. Nezumi too smirked, placing his hand on his mouse-like mask. Taking his time, he took off his mask, lowering it so that his face was shown to the small team of the most deadly shinobi in the world. All of Rohan froze. Kid. Jiraiya finally decided to speak up after staying silent for the entire day they'd been traveling. I know why you wanted to bring the Uchiha Gaki along, he pointed his thumb over his shoulder at said raven-haired Gaki, but why did we bring the Death Glare kid? He asked. Naruto turned his head to his newest student, chuckling at the Death Glare comment. Turning back to his godfather, he smiled. Gaara is one of my students now. He stated. We have no idea how long we are going to be gone, and I didn't want to leave him in my room at Nachan's place the entire time. He shook his head. And I need to begin training him as well. They need to be ready for when the Akatsuki stop playing around, especially Gaara. He wouldn't let the Akatsuki take Gaara's bijou from him, he refused. Jiraiya nodded, accepting the answer. Alright, he then gave a pointed look. But if he starts randomly killing people, I'm blaming you. He knew exactly how unstable the ex-Suna Jinchuriki was, and his apparent unquenchable thirst for blood was disconcerting. Naruto just gave him a happy smile and nodded. They had been traveling for an entire day already, searching town to town all throughout Hai no Kuni. Apparently, one of Jiraiya's spies spotted Tsunade in the neighboring gambling villages, which, to someone as close to the woman as Jiraiya, was the obvious location of the legendary sucker. Naruto had briefly spoken to both Sasuke and Gaara about the mission, and both didn't care too much. Sasuke followed because his master asked him to come, and Gaara followed so he could learn how to truly be alive, to be awake. To be a monster. Naruto could feel these emotions in his fellow Jinchuriki, and he was almost as excited as the redhead. Another monster would soon grace the earth, and it was going to be glorious. Anoki, Sachikage of Awagakure no Sato, sat in his office, a faraway look on his face. He just sat there in the dark, wishing he had never crossed Konoha. How was he supposed to know that? He was so strong? Though was he even human? Boy strength was on a level so far above anything he'd ever seen before in his life, and he had even faced the nightmare that was Uchiha Madara. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed child reached to the heavens, and brought their wrath down upon his people without a second thought. The son had truly surpassed the father, because IWA had a new butcher, a new boogeyman, a new harbinger of death and destruction. The one they call Uzumaki Naruto, the Kamikage of Konoha no Sato, the most terrifying shinobi the aged Inoki had ever faced. He looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. He was afraid. Suddenly, his door slammed open, an upset, short-haired young woman rushing in. She wore the standard red, one-sleeved IWA shinobi uniform. Gigi. Kuratsuchi, the Tsuchikage's granddaughter, ran towards her grandfather. What happened? She asked. Kuratsuchi had been on a mission to Kumo when she heard word of what happened in Konoha, and she rushed back as fast as she could, only now arriving. She could see the sheer terror in her grandfather's eyes. It was enough to frighten her, because her grandfather was so powerful, so invincible in her eyes, that anything that could make him so fearful thoroughly terrified her. When she saw his shaking hands, she grabbed them into hers, squeezing tight. Anoki finally registered that someone had entered his office and made eye contact with his granddaughter. The heavens, he started in a shaky, breathless whisper. He shivered, they spoke. Kuratsuchi narrowed her eyes in confusion. The Kamikage. He opened the heavens, he started to panic. He's not human, he warned, he's something more. We need to prepare. A look that she'd never seen in her grandfather's eyes replaced the fear, the anxiety. Prepare for what, Gigi? She asked, hesitantly. Anoki gave her a dark, sinister look, taking to the air, before answering. Prepare for war, Kuratsuchi. He stated in a cold voice. We prepare for war. Are you angry? Sakura asked her best friend and rival, Yamanaka Ino, with a questioning look. She had long since left her childish battle for Sasuke-kun's love behind, instead trying to prove herself to him. She loved Sasuke, she really did, and he deserved more than a game of who gets who. Ino just sighed, picking up another stick of dango from her tray. No, she said in a defeated tone. The two sat in the Dango Cafe, a new sweet shop that opened near the Yamanaka Flowers shop. The blonde sighed again. You won, fair and square. She stated. Sakura decided not to scold her for talking about Sasuke's love like it was nothing but a fool's competition. Her face then turned mischievous. So, have you two done it yet? She asked while wiggling her eyebrows suggestively. Sakura's face went red, her mind inconveniently going limp. She opened her mouth, but was only able to sputter out incomprehensible chunks of speech, if it could even be called as such. Oh, I'd very much like to hear this as well. Another voice spoke, clearly female. How's Duckbutt in the sheets? Mitarashi Anko asked. The snake mistress had a stick in her mouth, which no doubt had dango skewered on it previously. Ino just smiled at the older woman. She now had backup. Spill, forehead, she urged. You totally did it, didn't you? By this time, Sakura was redder than a tomato. This wasn't fair, she was being assaulted on two fronts. She was so embarrassed, she could hardly take it. I'll spill if you do. Anko said, giving the girls a smug, almost proud, look. At this, both Sakura and Ino were blushing, the thought of someone like Anko sleeping with someone their age a little too much for either of them. And Sakura knew that Anko was just one of Naruto's women. Unfortunately, that thought brought the image of Naruto, Anko, and Mei in bed together. Sakura's nose began to bleed. It was late. The moon was but a sliver of its full self, the stars twinkling in the thousands. It was slightly colder in the forest they settled in than in the city. The breeze was minuscule, but enough to bring chills to their bodies. They pushed through the cold, through it all, as they slowly took deep breaths in unison. Can you feel it? Naruto, Gaara, and Sasuke all said at the same time, effectively answering the question. Their heartbeats matched, their breathing matched, their everything. It matched. This feeling, what is it? Again, all three boys asked as one. The three of them smiled. It's harmony. They spoke as a single being. They continued. Their very thoughts were shared between them. Suddenly, the presence of another appeared in the small clearing they were in, all three boys turning to face the person at the same time. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, slightly unnerved at the synchronized movement. What's going on, kid? He asked his godson. I discovered this about my empathy ability a long time ago. All three answered. I can push my empathy onto others. The three of them stood simultaneously, before breaking off individually. I call it unity. They still spoke as one, even though they moved separately now. It's total understanding, total harmony. They raised their right hands before clutching them, making a fist. We can move as three individuals, but see and feel as one entity. It's maximum battle awareness. Jiraiya thought for a moment in total silence, his face not showing how he felt, yet. Naruto, Sasuke, and Gaara could determine his emotions like it was the easiest thing in the world. He was impressed. The sage then smirked, bending his legs slightly. How about we test this unity in a real battle? He asked before rushing at Sasuke, who still had a cloth wrapped around his eyes. He was in striking distance, before the raven-haired boy smirked. Suddenly, a wall of sand rose between them, effectively halting the Sannin. In a stunning display of speed and teamwork, Sasuke was at his back, his left hand encased in crackling light. Jiraiya went to move, only to realize that his leg was bound to the spot by sand. Hari Jizo. The Sannin called out, his mane of gray-white hair suddenly expanding, covering his entire body before sharpening. This technique could stop a regular Chidori if enough chakra was used, and Sasuke would be skewered. That's when the Uchiha vanished in a gilded flash, appearing next to the blonde. Jiraiya widened his eyes. Naruto had used the seal on Sasuke to teleport the boy to him. A reverse Hiraishin. The mere seconds of shock he felt was all Naruto needed. A tri-pronged kunai was pointed at his face, the only exposed part of his body. With a single glance, he saw sand surrounding him, poised in the air, in sharp, blade-like constructs, all pointed at him. He was perfectly subdued. He had gotten used to Naruto beating him in spars long ago, but to see how easily the three of them worked together, how easily their teamwork flowed, was stunning. It was, in the only way to describe it, flawlessly graceful. No, there was another way to describe such fluid collaboration. Terrifying. The three of them hadn't known each other for very long, a few months being the longest, a few days being the shortest, and yet they fought together like they had been for years. It was absurd, it was. It was the norm for his godson. Jiraiya shook his head. Naruto was ridiculously talented, and he knew he was going to make his students into something like him. He was going to make monsters. After a considerable amount of time, which was only a few minutes for the elite ANBU squad, Team Ro had finally accepted Nezumi too. Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage, was back, and he took up the title of his son's previous rank. He was very well, the only shinobi they would accept as a replacement, him being just as legendary as his son. There was no doubt in his skill, he was a god-tier ninja. There was no doubt in his loyalty, he had sacrificed everything to ensure the safety of the village. There was no doubt in him at all, and he was welcomed into the fold easily. Minato being alive was too much of an advantage for Konoha not to keep a secret. The village's enemies would be idiotic to face Naruto now, but Naruto was a very active shinobi. He never stayed in the village for long. Konoha was by far the most powerful village of the Great Five, but with the rumors and information provided by the master spy Jiraiya about the Akatsuki called for certain countermeasures. Any organization that could control the actions of Uchiha Itachi was enough for anyone to take certain cautions. With the information of multiple bijou in the possession of Konoha in circulation, war was inevitable. The Akatsuki, apparently, were hunting Jinchuriki, or would be, and now the other nations would demand the distribution of bijou to put the balance of power back to its previous state. That, of course, was never going to happen. Uzumaki Naruto would never hurt the village, but he would slay all that opposed him when it came to the safety of his family. And if anyone even looked at his newest student, the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi, he'd do the same. He was an overprotective person, most likely due to his sister's overwhelmingly overprotective personality. So war was no longer an if matter, but a when. There was only so much one person could do, and Uzumaki Naruto was only one person, he couldn't protect everyone. That's where Minato came in. As of the moment, Minato and Naruto were the only SS-ranked shinobi in all of Hai no Kuni. People like Mato Gai and Hitaki Kakashi could hold their own against a single S-ranked ninja, but multiple. Not even the Kapinin could handle that. Konoha was by no means totally reliant on Uzumaki's power. There were plenty of powerful ninja under her command, but the kind of storm that was on the horizon. It wouldn't be enough. Jiraiya might have been able to face 2 or 3 S-ranked ninja, but he had his invaluable spy network to keep up, and that was where he was needed the most. Already the Akatsuki were most likely planning to besiege the Great Walls, and IWA no doubt would crave for revenge. Kirigakure was definitely their ally, Naruto made sure of that, but Mizu wasn't enough. Relations with Suna were rocky at best, the sand-riddled village Kageless, and without its Jinchuriki. Hyuma was an unknown. On one hand, the village also had multiple Jinchuriki, too, to be exact, but they were a militaristic village to the core. Konoha, having so many bijou in its possession, would make them uneasy, at the very least. And the fact that the Cloud Village had ties with IWA was disconcerting. The two villages had joined forces to annihilate Uzushiogakure in the past, after all. So Konoha was virtually ally-less, sans Kiri. While the village had powerful shinobi, they wouldn't be enough to support an all-out war with so many enemies. With Minato back, attackers would be surprised, and quite frankly overwhelmed, to face both the original Yellow Flash and the new one. The two SS-ranked shinobi could fall armies in mere seconds. One was terrifying, two was impossible. Minato, now as Nezumi too, was currently in a 4-man cell made up of Rohan agents. Nico had informed them that the Mizukage and the Genin team that made it to the finals, along with its Jonin sensei, were headed back to Kiri, and Team Ro was requested to see them back safely. A man Minato had actually been on missions with in the past, Ukami, was appointed the Buntecho for the mission. Ukami was an older man, with long, brilliant white hair that was tied in a simple ponytail. The wolf-masked man was someone who was revered as the greatest kenjutsu expert in all of Konoha. He was the reason the 7 ninja swordsmen were nigh extinct. He had wished to prove himself, and the heads of 5 of Kiri's best swordsmen was an accomplishment the likes of which was legendary. He was a man Minato had respected, his skill easily borderline S rank. The squad was following the small group of Kiri shinobi from the shadows, their presence known, but only because it was told to them. Minato ran in close proximity with a blonde-haired kunoichi. Rizu was apparently a prodigy in the Yamanaka clan's mind-walking techniques, and a genjutsu expert. She obviously wasn't a frontliner, but if she was anything like a Noichi, she was just as valuable a teammate as he was. Someone who underestimated a mind walker was a foolish person. The woman kept stealing glances at him, as if she wished to say something, but would quickly avert her gaze, staying her tongue. He wasn't sure, but with Nico's warning to her, he had a guess of what she wanted. If you even think about flirting with him, I'll make sure you stay celibate your entire life, understand? Apparently, Rizu was a flirt. He wasn't too worried, though. His heart belonged to one woman, and she would have it even in death. Uzumaki Kushina was like the sun to him. She lit his path, kept him warm, and was always with him. She was the only woman he had ever been with, and she was the only woman he wanted to be with. They gave their hearts, bodies, and souls to each other, and each other alone. No one but him had touched, or even seen, her flesh, and the same was true with his. He was not an arrogant man at all, but he knew he was powerful enough now to make sure he died of old age. Even so, though, he would not betray his wife. She was waiting for him, after all. Beside Ukami was Uma. Uma had come off as a gentle, caring woman in the time he had known her, which wasn't very long at all. He had spoken shortly with all of Rohan before they left for Kiri, and the horse-masked operative had been pleasantly cheery. She had spoken about his son like he was the greatest person she had ever met, explaining the promise made to her about the Hyuga clan. His son had promised to dissolve the distinction between the main and branch families within the Byakugan-wielding clan. That was a monumental promise, one he wasn't sure could be kept, but if anyone could, it was his son. Rohan had followed the Kirinin for hours before they stopped to make camp, resting for a few hours before continuing the journey back to their home. While the Kiri shinobi rested, Minato took the time to converse with his new team. Uma-san, he began, getting the attention of the horse-masked woman. The black-haired kunoichi turned to him. I was wondering if you could tell me a little about an agent of Rohan. He was so curious about the hulking man that he couldn't quite understand, especially since he only spoke in grunts. Ushi, he continued, bringing up the ox-masked man, what's his background? He wasn't a member of the ANBU when I was in command. He had never even heard of an operative codenamed Ushi before. Uma smiled behind her mask. Ushi is a survivor of the Blitz. When she spoke those words, Minato's whole body tensed. Seeing her newest teammate's discomfort, she continued. He was only a genin then, but he somehow survived. Minato was silent. He was taken in by a Konoha medic Nin, who helped him recover. When he was able to walk again, Minato flinched, it was obvious that something was wrong. The blonde-haired man wished he never asked this question now. His brain processed things differently, and he lost the ability of speech. She shook her head. He isn't brain dead, he just receives information differently. He associates authority with power. Here she giggled. Only Nezumi could handle him, and it's only because of his orders that Ushi listens to Nico Taicho. Minato was still silent, lost in his thoughts. The Blitz was his crowning achievement. That was the day he slaughtered thousands of IWA Nin in seconds. He had thought everyone that day had died by his hand, but to hear that someone had survived. He finally let out a long, pained breath. So he survived the Blitz, he replied. And I injured him permanently. No wonder he wanted to attack me. Uma giggled softly. He didn't attack you because of who you are. He faced her again. He didn't even know who you were when he attacked you, silly. That was true. He attacked you because of who you aren't. That confused him. Ushi respects Mizumi Taicho more than he respects the Hokage. He's the only person he sees worthy of any kind of recognition. Behind his mask, Minato smiled. His son had such strong bonds. For someone to wear his mask. If it was anyone but you, you'd be dead by now. The former Kage paused, taking a moment to process the information that was given to him. He doesn't even remember the blitz, does he? He asked after a moment. He's seen my face, but he didn't even show a sliver of hatred towards me. Uma shook her head. He doesn't remember anything from his life before he woke up from his coma in Konoha. He went to reply when he noticed the Mizukage signal for him. Taking in a deep breath to calm his mind, he shunshined to the auburn-haired woman. Yes, Mizukage-sama, he asked in a respectable, politically correct fashion. Mei raised an eyebrow. I don't think a former Kage of your caliber should be addressing me in such a manner, Nozumi-san. She then blushed slightly. Especially considering my relationship with your son. She sounded unsure of herself. I am a Kage no longer, Mei-san. He spoke slightly less formal. And I have no right to interfere in any relationships my son may or may not have. He wasn't totally upset with Naruto having adult relationships with two women at the same time. Partly because they knew about each other, and partly because his son was a man already. He had been a shinobi for a long time. He knew what he wanted, and he could make those decisions for himself. That is actually why I wish to speak with you, Nozumi-san. She began again, nervously. I'm somewhat traditional in the matters of the heart. She looked to the stars, and he understood the expression that marred her face. It was the look of a lover who hoped their other was looking at the same sky as them. And I'd like your approval in our relationship. Minato was silent, just looking the powerful woman in the eyes, searching for something. Mei, to her credit, was unflinching in the presence of the yellow flash. She sat there, perfectly still, allowing the father of the man she loved gaze at her with intensity. After a few seconds, Minato had found it. The certain look in her eyes that told him she loved his son wholeheartedly. He found that spark of love that was created when there was love between two or, in this case, three. Mei loved him, she loved his son. You really love him, don't you? He asked. He already knew the answer, but it never hurt to ask. He's the only man I've ever loved. It was true. She had been with a couple of people before, but they had never made her feel like this. She was happy, genuinely happy. He was always on her mind, always in her dreams, everywhere. He was everywhere. She could still feel his warmth, and she wanted nothing more than to be in his arms again. Then I approve. Minato answered. Mei smiled. But, he paused, the aura of happiness and acceptance vanishing. If you ever betray my son in any way, he spoke so differently. The blonde-haired man usually had such a warm, caring voice, and he always felt bright. Now, however, as he looked at Mei like she was but an ant under his boot, living only because he let her live, he felt like Naruto did when he was angry. He felt like the scariest person alive. I will erase Kirigakure. Somehow, Mei knew the man was speaking in the literal, not the figurative, and the fact that he said it with such confidence thoroughly terrified her. She just nodded slowly. She knew she didn't really have anything to fear. She would never betray Naruto, ever. She'd die loving him, and then love him more in the afterlife. What did scare her was how powerful the father and son she was now bound to forever were. Namikaze Minato was the original harbinger of death, his very name sending other Kage fleeing. Uzumaki Naruto was only 13, yet he was now being called the Godslayer. These people were in a league so out of reach of normal peoples that it was terrifying. Minato turned his back, ready to walk away, before stopping. Then I leave my son's happiness to you, Mei-san. He spoke once again in his warm tone. The woman now understood. There was no reason to scare her any further. Mei was thankful for the warm tone, and she gained her composure, quickly. Hi, father. She said. Minato smiled under his mask. Three figures walked in a calm pace, the numerous trees surrounding them. These trees were everlasting in this part of the world. I thought we were going to aim. Orochimaru stated suddenly, his voice defeated. Kisame smirked. He was excited. Itachi decided to take a detour, and he couldn't wait to have some fun. Don't worry, Snake. You'll meet Leader Sama again soon. We just have a little business to take care of. His shark-like teeth were as sharp as ever. Orochimaru snarled silently. I'd rather not see him again. He whispered. Silence, Orochimaru. Itachi finally spoke. You should be grateful. He continued with his ever-stoic facade. Today, we capture the one responsible for your humiliating defeat. Orochimaru licked his lips, a sinister smile on his face. Uzumaki. This was all for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked it and that you will be back for more. Please like, share and subscribe. See ya.